Hey, everybody. How you doing, Nino?
Hey, how are you?
Good. How you doing, Dennis?
Doing great. Good.
So, yep. Just a reminder for those coming in, today we're going over the art and business of commercial retouching, some tips and tricks in that world, retouching. And a little reminder, welcome everybody. Let us know where you're watching from. So if you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, let us know in the comments below the live. It's a bit of a heat wave here in Los Angeles. How is it where you are, Nino?
It's hot like every summer, so my sympathy for you guys is minimal. Just saying. South Texas, so.
Hey, it's even reached 98 here in Santa Monica today. So
look out, that's crazy. Yeah, that's just a way of life down here.
Santa Monica, though,
yeah. We don't get that same humidity you do. So
no, yeah, but we're hot from May till October. So, like I said, my sympathy it's minimal.
So yeah. Welcome everybody. Let us know where you're watching from. Today we are here for the art and business of commercial retouching. Nino Batista and Dennis Dunbar. And Nino, did you want to kind of just go over what that focus is, the art and business of commercial retouching?
Yeah, no, happy to. So, Dennis and I have been sort of industry friends for a while. Haven't actually met in person, but we've always admired each other's work and had many a discussion. And he's beta tested things for me and whatnot. And he proposed the idea that we should try to put together some curriculum, educational events for people who wanted to, like, for lack of a better term, take retouching to that next level, or were curious about being a full-time retoucher, perhaps, or they just want to take retouching a little more seriously rather than knocking out something quick. They're like, I really am passionate about retouching, and we realize there's not a whole lot offered for that. Tons of tips and tricks for beginners, etc., and some decent amount of advanced stuff out there, but I'm critical of a lot of it. I don't think that the curriculum is that great, and very little about the business aspect of it, about running a retouching company or running,
Sure.
Any type of commercial retouching enterprise of any kind. That's really Dennis's forte. And we thought, we could come together, and I think we could really provide a valuable resource.
Great.
That's kind of the main premise behind it.
Yeah, and Dennis, you're part of that.
I agree with what Nino was talking about. There's lots of stuff out there about retouching techniques, about how to do nice skin, how to do product work, or whatever like that. I've taught a lot of classes on that. But there's a fundamental difference between retouching for yourself. If you're the photographer and you're making the final decision maker, if you're the designer, you're the final decision maker, versus being a commercial retoucher, where you're going to have to hand your files off to somebody else, especially in the entertainment advertising industry. When I work on movie posters, there's a very strict protocol about how you build your files and what standards it has to come up to. So that's a lot of what we want to talk about, the difference between retouching workflows for when you're the final decision maker, and then when you have to build it. So somebody else is going to say a little more of this or a little less of that, and you have to be able to adjust it really easily.
Great. And I just want to give a shout out. Thanks, John, for being here. His brain is completely empty, waiting to be filled up with knowledge. Bring it, guys.
Hey, good to see John's here.
Shanu John is here. Hello, Nino and Dennis, two legends with even bigger legend, Andrew. Don't know what that is.
I love it.
And Camilla is here, watching from Atlanta. Camilla, not sure. Good to see you here. Thanks for being here. So Nino, do you want to jump on in and show some things, and then jump over to Dennis after that?
Yeah, for sure. I've taught so many private students and group classes over the years, and you start noticing patterns, right? And there's so much education available out there. YouTube, everybody talks about YouTube. Let me put on my glasses. By the way, the glasses is only in the last year kind of thing. I made it 47 years without them, and now
looks good.
Thank you.
You get
So there's a couple of things that I think are important. Obviously, we don't have enough time today to pretend that we're going to do a full retouching course, but to kind of give you an idea of how the class, at least my angle of the class, and I think Dennis will agree, my angle of the class is to try to get you thinking a little bit different, because we are all inundated with YouTube. And there's a lot of good information on YouTube, but there's a lot of redundant information on YouTube and a lot of truncated and misinformed things on YouTube. And I want to get you thinking in different ways and little details that you might overlook. I know Dennis has a lot to say on the world of like frequency separation, which I'm sure most of you have heard about. There's so much to do on frequency separation, more than likely than the video you saw in 2017 about it from whatever, YouTube channel you watch. There's just so many different ways to skin the proverbial cat. And rather than make assumptions, I want to just mention little small details. For example, and Andrew, is my screen up? My
Yes.
Photoshop?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I did this shot. I demoed this the other day on a small video in my group, but as well as some students. There's all kinds of colors here, right? And
Nino, did you want to
Yes, sir.
just quickly collapse your properties panel?
Oh,
Just-
okay.
yeah,
Well,
just-
I'm gonna need it in a second, but yes.
Yeah.
So my point is, this shot was a good example for me to show, because let's say you think to yourself, you have all these vibrant colors. I want to boost them a little bit, right? Okay, so let's say you know about adjustment layer. So you come down here and you choose hue and saturation, and you boost the saturation, and you've increased color. And that is passable by every definition. Nothing wrong with that. However, little details, like for example, we're not going to talk math right now, but if you go to the vibrance adjustment layer, that saturation is calculated slightly differently. So you can experiment with that, but more to the point, we have vibrance, which also calculates saturation boost slightly differently. It protects skin tones. Most people don't know that. On top of that, you can take the vibrance layer and put it on color blend mode, which means it's going to target chroma information or color information and not luminosity information, or what I call luma. So a vibrance boost on color blend mode is an incredibly smooth color boost. Little things like that. These are the kind of things that I find nobody knows about. Because I guess when you've done this 100,000 hours, you find different ways to play around. And and Dennis can relate to this. Sometimes when you're using like flow, you wish you had 0.5 flow as opposed to just 1%, because you get to that detailed point where little bits of, little tiny minor micro details matter. So this kind of thing, when I've shown people this, is that I never knew that vibrance uses a different kind of algorithmic calculation for saturation, and that vibrance itself protects skin tones, and that color blend mode minimizes my luminosity changes. These are technical things, but the bottom line is, if you use vibrance on color mode, you get better color boosts. Simple things like that most people don't think about.
I agree with the whole idea of using blending modes with adjustment layers. I came up with a technique. I call it divide and conquer, and I've taught it, I think, in Andrew's class before, where you use two curve adjustment layers, one set for color blending and one set for luminosity blending. And you're working off the same thing. You can adjust your color without affecting tonality at all. You can affect tonality without affecting that. So I completely agree with your workflow.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just to illustrate it, if you're using curves for color adjustments, put the curves layer on color blend mode. It's not like it's in and of itself a master solution to make your work better, but it gives you more finite control. And if you want to be able to get those professional looking results, nuance is everything. Okay, that's why we say in retouching, when we look at our students' work, we use the term overcooking, because that's what happens to beginners. You tend to overcook. You find a technique and you beat it to the ground. Eventually, you'll discover nuance, and there's so many different ways to shuffle that nuance, right?
Right.
Now, Dennis, just to clarify, I believe you are still having some StreamYard issues, so you're not able to show everything today that you were going to show?
I can show windows, but I can't show the palettes or the menus. So
okay,
I can talk about it, but it's going to be a little more limited in what I can show people. So if you want to show a little bit about the frequency separation you do, that might help get them up to speed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so technical issues. Doing a demo on the web.
It just happens sometimes. So like, for example, how do we get you thinking out of the box? For example, just now I mentioned 4 different ways to boost saturation, and that's not even the only ways, because maybe you didn't think about that because someone showed you hue and saturation layer, and that's it. That's all you know. Useful, sure, but there's just more to it. Not just for the sake of it, but you'll notice over time as you start working with things, that you'll be able to identify up front what tool and what methodology you need to accomplish what you want to accomplish. For example, frequency separation, right? Can do it in so many different ways. Doing it manually, most people don't want to do it manually, even if they know the steps. They have an action that they either downloaded or created, right? And how many times, I'm going to guess, did you watch a video 10 years ago or whatever, 2 years ago, that said, create your high and low layers and blur that low layer until the texture just barely goes away. Whatever radius that it may end up being, median or surface blur, whatever the case may be. And then now you go, now you're ready to go, and frequency separation is done. And then most likely, 99 times out of 100, you were told that it's for skin. And it is. All of that's true, but it's about 5% of what you need to know. Dennis, for example, can show you frequency separation on products and really anything that exists. A car, concrete, curtains, clouds, whatever, fabric. These are just textures, frequencies that are manipulated in different ways, right? So for example, let's say I'm going to use real quick. This is not a promo. I'm going to use my panel for frequency separation just because I can change radius on the fly to show you an example of what I'm talking about. So let's say I use a high radius on median of 25 pixels. I am making assumptions, guys, that you know what frequency separation is or have at least tried it. I'm sure, Andrew, you must have a ton of resources on this if someone's completely lost. But to give you an idea, this is just the beginning of it at 25. Let's talk about this jeans real quick. First of all, this is a final shot and Alex's skin is basically perfect. Let's talk about this jean jacket for a minute. So let's say, I don't know, what am I going to do? I think I'm going to paint, to be honest with you. I'm going to overdo this for the sake of demo. Let's say in between the high and low layer, I'm going to choose this color and I'm going to paint the jeans, effectively minimizing. I can mask this out to clean it up later, but I'm minimizing some of the, the folds, if you will, just by painting in color. You can do this by blurring the background. The low layer as well. I'm just giving you a fast demo, right? Okay. Now, this is a 25 pixel radius on how I did my, blur it until the texture goes away. All right. Well, with my panel, I can switch it on the fly, and I'm going to. Let's go 4. We're going to leave the work done, and we're going to switch it to 4. You can barely see that, but you notice the texture got tighter. What about put it back up on like 28? Watch the texture get broader. What does that mean for you? That means that when you go to set up frequency separation, you need to be able to target, whether with either experience or experimentation, you need to be able to target what radius you think you might need to accomplish what you're trying to do. I think it was Earth Oliver who said that the higher the radius, the more texture you take from the low layer and shove it to the high effectively. That's kind of not exactly accurate, but it gets you the idea of what's happening. And so the radius isn't just until you smooth texture a little bit. It's what are you trying to accomplish? And that's why the radius matters. That's why my panel, for example, goes up to a 30 pixel radius. And sometimes I do a manual one even higher. That is just one basic idea that you can use radius to, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, whether broad, rough texture like denim, burlap, and things like that, concrete, or really refined texture like her shoulder. Never mind how you can use it for sharpening effects as well. Dennis, anything to add to that? Because I could just babble all day.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I completely agree with that. And you're absolutely right. When you are generating your low layer, generating your frequency separation layers, you have to think about how you want to divide and conquer the job, the problem. So, if you're working on wrinkles, say like you are, like, okay, I want to get it just so it's easy enough to smooth them out on the low layer, and then the high layer I can fix whatever texture issues I need. So like one of the things you'll notice, like when you were painting them out, was where there was a shadow, the texture looks kind of funny. So you're going to have to some of that texture, or like that. So you're trying to think of like what's going to make that easier for you, rather than having a hard and fast rule like skin is X and clothing is Y. You have to think about how it's going to work. And experience. You do this 100 times, 1,000 times. Experience starts to speak to you, and they're like, "Oh, hey, here's how I do it." And even then, sometimes there might come a problem where, like you were just showing, where okay, this part of the image I tackle with this one, this other part of the image I'm going to use a different setting on.
That's it. Yep. People don't realize that, and a lot of people, I was like, it's shocking to me that I find some students, and again, we're not making fun of anybody. People learn, and we are all there once. But I have students who have frequency separation that doesn't even ask you for the setting. It's just an action and it rolls whatever setting it has. And I'm like, no, 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 no. That's so many opportunities missed. Never mind my panel. Like I said, if you have an action, but you can't even pick the radius or you don't have a different action for the different blurring modifier, because eventually you get picky potentially between surface, median, and Gaussian, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. At least I do, not just the radius. So it's about that texture separation, like he says, divide and conquer, which is a great term for it, because eventually, if you get like, especially at your level, Dennis, where you work with all kinds of different images, when you get to that level, you really don't see skin, burlap, couches, concrete. You see texture, high and low frequencies. You see chroma versus luma, and you separate it in different ways to attack it different ways. This much I know, even though all I do is portraits.
Yeah, I was recently working on a poster for Tulsa King, a show on I think I forget what network it runs on. I think it's a Paramount Plus show.
Right.
But we had all this grassland that we had extended out or whatever like that, and used generative fill to do it. And it was like the parts that were generated out, like the texture was lacking. So frequency separation allowed me to just clone the texture for the grass. I'm just thinking, where do I get the texture from? How do I make this look sharp and detailed? So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, no, that's I was that way. I'm not even, like I said, guys, I'm not even remotely making fun of any beginner. I was that way on frequency separation for the first few years. Like, oh, I learned how to use it. I set it up, and all I do is I run the action and I go. And then I started learning about the possibilities of that. And like he said, divide and conquer. Eventually, you become, as they say, dangerous. You know, oh, you have a crease on the side of a body. You know how to fix it. You have a crack in concrete. You have a dent in a car. You have folded fabric. You know how to attack it because you can see the texture and you can see the color versus luminosity and determine what can be changed. And like I said, Dennis, you more than me on that. I'm a portrait guy.
Yeah, I love the idea that your panel can have these different adjustments and people are making intelligent decisions about it.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm more of a do it manually every time.
Yeah.
Because it becomes so locked in my brain. I've had people say like, oh, my action doesn't work anymore. Where can I find the action? I don't like. Well, if the only way you know how to do it is I press a button and it works, you really have to make it part of you.
That's it.
I studied martial arts for quite a while, and there's a reason why you do a kick or a punch 10,000 times. It has to be part of you. And so the more you do it manually, the more you're doing it where you're intentional, where like with your panel, you're thinking about what the radius is going to be and looking at it, you're making decisions. It becomes more and more a part of you, as opposed to I hit a button and it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I hit a button and the worst can get you by until something goes wrong. And that's what I always preach about any art. Just like I'm a musician for 30 years too. When you experience allows you a lot of things, but one of the main powers of experience is flexibility. Because if something happens or you get a weird request or, hey, can you fix this? You probably can, because you have the experience to understand the different techniques to go about doing it. If you're just pushing buttons and you're getting a result, as soon as there's a curveball, you're lost. And that's what we're trying to preach, not just in Dennis and I in our individual curriculums, but in this class moving forward. And today, even hopefully planting little seeds in your brain about there's more to this. And if you really get down into it, you can become, I don't want to say dangerous, but you can become infinitely creative. How's that?
And I have a question for both of you. You can take turns. So with all these changes, updates, new technology, what is your feeling about retouching with, like, do you like the spot healing tool or do you stay with the clone tool? Do you tend to use aspects of generative AI to extend something? Like there's, generative fill and there's generative extend. Do you use that? And what's your general view about this new technology?
Dennis?
Yeah, I use all of the above for work. Like one of my clients, football season's coming up. They're sending me a lot of football players to strip out. These are shots from like middle of the game or something like that. And so there's a lot of masking out. It's not difficult work, but like one of the creative directors, college football player has the quarterback has the towel in front of him, so he can dry his hands before he throws the ball or whatever like that. Well, it looks really lousy in a photograph. So like get rid of the towel. Well, it used to be that would be a really difficult thing, like a lot of cloning and painting and trying to figure out and get something. Like I'd have to know anatomy really well, whatever. Now, about 80% of the time, I can get rid of it with like generative fill or even the remove tool that's new. But when I'm really doing detail-oriented retouching, I tend to start off first with the spot healing tool. I go with the simplest to more complex. So the spot healing tool, I love using that. I do wish Adobe gave us a option for selecting current and below. Instead, it's all either this layer or all layers.
Agreed.
So if I've got a complex layer stack, I have to turn off everything above that layer. But I use the spot healing tool for that. If that's not working, then I go to the healing brush. And the healing brush is a little bit better for purposefully selecting the texture you're going to bring in. So I use it in terms of that. And then if that's not working, then I'll go to like a clone brush or paintbrush or whatever like that. And now we've got the remove tool and the generative fill tools as well. I think these things are becoming really effective tools for us. And there's a lot of AI apps out there now. Like if all you want to do is just get passable skin, you can go to Evoto and buy a bunch of credits and get a bunch of things cranked out. That's going to work for the lower end part of the market, or a lot of stuff where like, okay, they just want 100 shots. They don't have much of a budget for it. I need to bang them out. But if you're aiming at the mid or the high end, you need to really know these techniques and train your eye and know how to do these other things. So then the AI tools just become a tool, not the end result. And back to the thing about the automated process. I remember quite a while ago, a friend of mine, a photographer friend, shot a lot of men's fashion work. And he had me come over and do a one-on-one session with him one time. And it's like, yeah, you know, I mask these guys out and I get a little white outline around them and I don't know what to do. I'm like, well, how are you masking them out? Well, I use this plugin. The plugin generates the mask and then like, so you have an automated thing, but you don't know how to work with it when it doesn't solve an issue. If you knew about masking and then you used the automated tool, you'd know exactly what you need to do to fix that mask. But if you don't know the fundamentals of masking, you just use an automated tool, you're lost. So you're absolutely right. A curveball comes your way. If you're relying on a bunch of buttons and actions and you don't know what's going on underneath, it's going to restrict the amount of work you can do, and you're going to have more difficulties getting your work done.
And just to follow up with that real quick, would you say that there's a issue at times though where the quality or the resolution of the generative AI doesn't match like the original kind of resolution quality of your image?
Oh, yes. Yes, there are two things about that. One is we have to remember that almost all of the AI tools work off of blocks that are 1024 by 1024 pixels big. So basically, if you go with something like you select 3,000 pixels wide, it's going to interpolate that 1024 and kind of stretch it out. Not technically stretch it out, but it's basically just kind of like blowing that up. So you're not going to get the same kind of level of detail. So in Photoshop, you get the best result if you're going in blocks that are less than 1024 by 1024. There are times when you have an AI generated image or you have something and you just need to scale it up and you need to add more texture. Then there are other tools, like there's a web-based tool called Magnifique, MAGNEFIC.ai. And it's a subscription model, but it does several things really well. And one of the things that it does is it will scale your image up. The minimum is 2 times. So you have to think about this before you put an image in there. But you have these sliders to control it, and it will add a lot of realistic looking detail. And it may take a few tries to get the right kind of detail that you're looking for. But like that Tulsa King thing that I was just talking about, the red chair they had him sitting in was an AI generated red chair. And they're blowing it up to this monster poster size or whatever like that. Nowadays, entertainment stuff, you have to have these massive canvases. I think it was like 15,000 pixels wide or whatever like that. So they can crop it in any one of a number of ways. But the chair was probably about 4,000 pixels tall in this image. So like, well, there's no detail in the chair. What are we going to do? How do we make this look sharp? the sharpening techniques will sharpen the texture that's there, but it's not going to create texture that's not there. So I use that magnifique to bring in texture, and then I also use some frequency separation where I could like, okay, I've got the right texture over here, I need to put it over here too, and I could use frequency separation to then clone that texture over and bring the texture over.
And I was going to say I've gotten some good results with Topaz Photo AI, which I think you even also told me about originally. So
yeah,
that
Topaz Photo I use a lot to improve poor quality originals. Like if it has to blow up, or if all the client has is like a lot of these football players, they're JPEGs from the game. Sometimes, you know, the player's only 10 megabytes tall. If you crop in on them, that's too small for what they need to use. So the photo AI does a great job. But again, you have to be selective about how you use the sliders. So you're using subtly like a scalpel, not like a sledgehammer.
Sure. And Nino, your views on generative AI in Photoshop?
So yeah, first of all, everything Dennis said, I agree with. Even on the tools, I'll go back to the tools before I mention AI. I have been really moving into the remove tool lately, literally in the last couple of months for my skin editing. It is not the one tool I use, but it's mostly replaced healing unless I have a very specific texture to graft over. Remove, I do it first now. Nice. And I remove things that are shocking. I'm not sure yet, but I feel like if I do not put it on process after every stroke and just apply all that pink overlay everywhere, like all the little areas that I want to fix on skin, and then say go, it might take 45 seconds. But I feel like it's some kind of quasi AI. Like if you give it all this information, it'll make better decisions based on all of the spots at once. I could be wrong on this, but I feel like I'll do that. I'll spend 2.5 minutes getting every little spot in the skin that usually is a heal, and then I hit return and I let it do its thing for 60 seconds. And it's freaking brilliant. So I'm very impressed with Remove tool lately. Nice. But like Dennis said, and like we've been talking about, when you have specific textures you want to graft over or a specific thing you need to do, automation is a gamble at best, and often a problem. What I have been telling people about AI in general, when I first tested AI generative fill in Photoshop last year, first thing I was curious about was kind of data integrity we're looking at. So I opened up a 16-bit exported from Capture One as 16-bit. And then I had it reprocess the face. It was a fashion image to give me an entirely new face in a square. And it did. I don't have that readily available. I wish I could show you. I think it's still a video on YouTube. And then I ran a hue map and some other kind of like data analysis things on it. And I realized that the inside the square was not 16-bit. You saw a very obvious difference inside the square versus out of the square. The data was breaking down, similar to like if you run like a solarization on that, but a hue map usually shows it. So I was seeing what looked like 8-bit data inside 16. Why is that a problem? Well, if you do it at the very end of your edit, who cares? It's going to bring over all the colors and everything. If you do it in the middle of your edit, that area could respond differently to your adjustment layers, potentially. I'm being very picky. I mentioned that because trying the same test again this year has been better. So Adobe is constantly evolving it. Now it feels like it's actually processing at 16 potentially with still the resolution limit. So, you know, it's an evolving technology, and learning how to use it in your workflow as a tool, like Dennis said, is much more important than thinking it's a cure-all. And in my work, with a shot like this often being considered tame, Gen Phil yells at me 75% of the time anyway. So I do manual as it is.
Cool.
That's a very good point.
Right. So did you want to show Nino some of your kind of retouching
yeah, let's see.
Ways and means?
I mean, I'll mention, let's see if I can. I probably should have pulled up a completely unedited shot, but that's all right.
Well, while you're selecting the shot, one of the things you talked about using blending modes with adjustment layers.
Yeah.
One thing I find a lot of people aren't aware of is there'll be something like where somebody like, oh, I copied the background, I put it on overlay to get a saturation and contrast boost.
Yeah.
If you use an adjustment layer and you don't make any change to it and you put it on that same blending mode, you get the exact same result. And now you can change stuff underneath it and you don't have to remake it over and over again. Or it also keeps your file a lot smaller.
Yeah, for sure. Those little details like that are just so powerful. Well, let me show you. I don't know what you've been doing, Dennis, but here's like the remove tool, right? So I've been I turn it off, remove after each stroke, right? And I literally just
experiment with that.
yeah, and I come here and you know I get kind of bold with it. Sometimes I've removed like an entire like dark area under the eye. This one I remember I kept kind of natural. This is a final edit, just full disclosure. But I'm gonna pretend that I'm extra picky.
Andrea says hello to Dennis. Nino.
Hello, hello, hello. So you see how I'm just being somewhat like, and I don't get me wrong, I don't try to get everything. If I decided that this lampshade needs to remove, I wouldn't do that now. I try to do all the skin, and
Right.
I don't know if I'm right or not. But then once I say all these spots, I hit the little check mark and I sit back, and I swear to you, it's a better result than one at a time. I don't know if that's true.
It would certainly save time.
Maybe it's
Yeah,
really-
and I'll tell you what, you know what it also helps that people don't talk about? It helps retouching fatigue, because I feel like this is very satisfying to do. And I pause for a minute and I drink my water and I look at it and it comes back and it feels, because a lot of times, and Dennis can relate to this too, retouching fatigue is very real. You're like, I can make this image perfect. I don't have the energy and I'm worn out. And that can be real. Now, in my case, with just my quote, my own art, as opposed to a client waiting on it, I can be lazy and not do it. I'm not on deadlines, right? But when you are on deadlines, that retouching fatigue can be very real. So anyway, that's what I've been doing with the remove tool. I feel like that works really, really well. And I do that straight away, just to get rid of my...
The one tweak I would make,
yeah,
if you make a new layer, nothing in the layer, and then you turn on the remove tool, you turn on sample all layers.
Yeah.
You can go through, and if, like, you know, it worked in 9/10 of these, but this one over here didn't work, you just erase it and redo it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's definitely a very good idea. And you know, it's meant funny when you mentioned earlier about the what was mentioned earlier about the healing brush not having, excuse me, the spot healing not having current and below. That has killed me for so long, because I'm the same way. I'm in a huge layer stack and I have to turn off a bunch of layers above it because my only option is all or nothing. But that's why I usually use the remove tool right out of the gate, because I don't have to worry about any complications or anything like that, you know, any other layers on top. And you know, another thing too, I'm not, just to repeat, I try to train my students to look at an image not as skin, hair, eyes, table, floor. I try to look at it like, for example, frequency. Where would remove tool succeed the most on? Really obvious areas. And AI is changing, don't get me wrong, it's going to be able to identify more and more. But historically, we go after high frequency areas, lines, dots, really tight creases, anything that's a hard frequency point, the healing brush generally does pretty well on most of the time, etc. Right now, you know, we don't have a brush that you can just casually paint over the hair and it modifies the hair easily. I'm sure we'll get there, but I think about in frequency first, and then I might think about, like he said, divide and conquer. I'll think about, how do I need to separate the frequency? Do I just need to be aware of the frequency? Do I need to separate the color? Sometimes I protect the color, which is often something I do, like when I'm dodging and burning, or even using frequency separation to paint a face. I guess I can show you a quick example of that. I'll show you with an action that I've set up to explain this layer stack. This is not something I use every time, and I have way more actions than any human needs. It's just I'm a developer, so I have a lot. So just don't panic on that. You don't need 500 actions. So this is a layer stack I use with some frequency. It's complicated looking at first. I know people are like, what's going on? But real quick, one of the main things I do is I have the color data extracted on top, and then that's set to color blend mode. Why? Only one reason why: to protect it. You can modify it here if you can, but it's the same way as putting a blank layer on color blend mode. But I turn it off. People don't realize this unless they've learned from me. I do frequency separation and dodging and burning in black and white exclusively. And because all I'm doing is thinking about texture and shape and this and that. And then the color, when I turn it back on, if I have color shifting, I can easily fix it. And this is why I have that clip down layer on top. I can match color that a shadow doesn't match now because I've dodged it, or things like that. I clean up. Everybody talks about my skin work. I know I love to do it, and that's, I guess, what I'm known for. And that's fine. I'm proud of that. Don't get me wrong. But I do it all in black and white, like everything. If I'm going to be frequency separating, you know, painting something, I will be sampling in black and white. And why is that cool for me? Well, let's say I'm going to paint all this in a super glam look, where I'm not going in detail. I'm just painting in areas. Well, the color is completely untouched. It's protected. That's why I separate it, and then I can modify it later. So that's another Similar related to what Dennis said, divide and conquer. Put the color on top nice and safe, and I fix everything else below where 90% of my problems exist on skin anyway. And then when I turn it back on, shifting color is easy. Now, one way to understand why we divide and conquer is this little demo. Whatever, doesn't matter the size. Let's say, for example, this is something I like to show my students as well. Let's say you have red, and then, oops, forgot I was doing graphics work earlier. I have a new panel coming out too. It's an alpha. Okay, so if you look at these two colors in the digital world, in the color space, they are the opposite, right? So we have cyan and we have red, completely opposite. So if we do something linear though, like hue and saturation, if we take the saturation down, they're identical. And that's counterintuitive to people. Why? Because they are the polar opposite color hue range, polar opposite hue range, but the identical luminosity range or brightness, right? So that is why we separate color and, or, you know, chroma and luma. This is why we separate it sometimes when we want to try to solve problems or make changes in some kind. Same thing that we do with high and low frequencies. And there's gradations to all of this, right? So this is why that separation is so important. I wish I worked on more stuff that like what you did, Dennis, because if I'm tackling a car, like I used to do a lot of car photography, I'm still very lost on that. But when it comes to a portrait, I can extract it and dismantle it and decompose it and just about any way I need to get what I need done. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, yo, I just figured out the healing brush. I just started last month. Calm down. I understand that. We're not trying to show off or intimidate anyone. We're just saying that there's a lot of nuance to this. And I don't think enough people talk about it. And that's why we're here, if I may be so bold.
So my friend Andrea, Happy Teach, says, what and where do you teach Nino? So do you want to talk a bit about the art and business of commercial retouching that is going to be happening in Los Angeles?
Me or Dennis?
Well, both of you, really. You know.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Like I said at the beginning of our little broadcast here, Dennis and I, he proposed the idea, and I thought, you know, that makes sense. And then one thing led to another, and we realized that for all of our students over the years, there's not been one sort of group class for this. So we're starting in Los Angeles, October 5th. And it's an all day kind of thing. And we're going to be talking about, it's a very organic sort of flow in terms of our curriculum. We have a curriculum, but we really are going to encourage that interaction because every person not only has different questions, but they have a different goal and a different level of experience. So we try to make sure that it's engaging, not shut up, sit down, we're going to lecture you, right? There's a lot of information, but we want to make sure that it's engaging. So we're going to talk about details like this to give you options, not tell you this is how you must do your workflow. Ideally, we should inspire you to understand that you need to create your own workflow and take you in some direction. And Dennis especially, but also I'll try to chime in as well, is going to talk about the business of it, because that's talk about an enigma. Most people don't understand the world of commercial retouching, and it can be lucrative, but you got to understand what you're getting into and even how to get into it. So that's going to be a big aspect of it, which I feel is an untapped curriculum. Dennis?
Yeah, Adobe has a Discord channel called Adobe Creative Careers. I'm one of the mentors on that, and they'll have panel discussions. And these are primarily aimed at people who, you know, students and people graduating college or going to art school, starting out. And one of the biggest questions is like, how do I get started? How do I find clients? You know, how do I build a business or whatever? So that's something that seems to be a lot of hunger about, is like how you do this. And, you know, not going to spend all day on this because we know people really want to have the meat and the fun part about the retouching. This is going to be a hands-on event. So bring your computers. We're going to give you practice files. You can have your own files that you want to practice with. We're going to show you some technique. And then Nino and I are going to trade off going around and helping make sure everybody's on track. So that's why we're limiting the number of seats that we have. I think we have, what, 20 or 30?
It's 20, yeah. We're not having a huge auditorium or anything.
So we're limiting the number of seats to 20 people to make sure that everybody gets one-on-one time for this. And it's going to be held here in Los Angeles. Anybody in LA area knows the Helms Bakery Complex in Culver City. Anthony Nex has a beautiful studio there, so it's going to be held at Anthony's studio for that. And yeah, we're really going to try to make sure people get a lot out of this. so that they can really learn how to elevate their retouching. Our goal is to make high-end techniques accessible for people who are learning and aren't there yet, but people who want to build, as opposed to like, yeah, I just want to make a good poster for my kid's soccer game, whatever. Great. That's totally legitimate. And we'll have lots of stuff for you for that. But our real goal is, if you want to build and establish a career, here's some information that's really going to help you build up to that level so you can have something that allows you to thrive.
And I just wanted to let people know that when I share the link to the recording of this live video event, I will have a link for people to sign up for that event. So that'll be clearly in the description of the YouTube recording, as well as I will put it on the event page on Facebook. There was a comment where someone was asking, you know, Dennis and Nino, do you have a course? And that was one thing I was going to suggest is, you know, this is a great thing to do, but I would say to also, if you could work on a course that you can have online that people can purchase, that might be something great for the future as well.
Yeah, this idea for doing a workshop together.
Yeah, Andrea says everything fun happens in LA.
Yeah, I agree. Except Adobe Max this year, they're not doing it in LA.
But they're probably going to come back to Max next year, though, right?
I hope so. But the whole idea of doing this workshop together kind of grew out of a thing where a few years ago with WPPI, I think Nino was kicking around the idea about doing a workshop outside, and I just like, oh, it'd be fun to do one with you. So that's where the idea is growing out of, and we're realizing there is a lot of interest in this for that. So the idea of creating a course that we can sell, you know, would be really good. There's still a lot of value to hands-on because you get direct interaction with Nino and I. When I've done hands-on workshops in the past, the model has been kind of like talk a little bit about a technique, give people some files to practice on, and then go around person to person during that time, during that hour and a half or so they had to practice, and help steer people the right way. And I'm always amazed, like some people like, oh, wow, you're doing a great job. Other people like, how'd you get over there? Okay, let's steer you back onto the field, get you going in the right direction. And that kind of thing is something that's you can only do in person. You can't really do that, you know, remotely quite so well. If somebody's taking a course and like, well, I'm trying this thing, it's not working. What am I missing? There's nobody there to tell you, oh, here's a simple key that can help you figure it out.
So my question is then, are you going to be going to other cities as well?
That's definitely our plan.
Great.
Yeah, that's the plan. And we're having some discussions with some companies as well for supporting that idea. And we'll take it as far as we can go. I will add, I think Dennis was kind of getting to this, but I will add that we aren't, you know, a course is possible. A video course is absolutely possible. But at the same time, we think there's just so much on YouTube already that it's not just a matter of come out to our course and sign up so we make money. It's also because we feel that in-person training is not only useful and practical and the best way to learn, but it's also lacking. At least it's lacking in the capacity that we want it to be, which is like a really valid, vetted set of instructors working with you personally. Yeah, everything fun happens in LA, but hopefully we can bring it around to other cities, and that afternoon that you can spend with us can send you in a different direction that you know, look, YouTube is great. And it's not just YouTube itself. It's obviously the people on it. They're doing things. There's a lot of tons of amazing content out there. If you need to watch, if you're brand new to Photoshop, watch Unmesh on Pixelperfect. You will learn a ton. That's great. But when it's time to ramp it up, or if you just want a little bit more because you have a little higher standard for yourself and you want to really do this, come out to a real class. We're really trying to make this something special.
All right. So we got John saying Dallas is lovely this time of year, guys. Just saying. So come to Dallas. And then Andrea says, I suggest places like DC, Columbia, MD, or Baltimore. I guess Maryland. Yeah, Baltimore.
One of the places we were talking about going is actually Byron Smith, who's a photographer and a creative guy. He works with Russell Brown a lot. He has a farm outside of Vancouver, Canada. Nice. And he's built an event space there, and he wants us to come out there and do a workshop.
Excellent.
So that's one of the places that we talked about. We also talked about possibly looking into going to some places in Europe as well.
Excellent. Great.
If I may, real quick, I brought up a demo in Photoshop. Andrew, if you can come back to my screen, I just want to show this real quick. This is not anything useful for anybody, but this is an example of the direction that you can take things. If you're a hyper nerd like me, color science nerd, then this is the kind of thing. This is literally a show off kind of thing of what's possible. If I show the background layer, which is the original image of Sophie, above it, there's a white layer of just pure white. Everything above that makes the image final, but it all has been broken down in different ways, extracted different mathematical ways. This is not an external plugin. This is all Photoshop functions. Okay. So, everything from what the red mask looks like, and then we channel that over with blend modes, what the yellow mask looks like, what a hue map looks like, what the chroma data looks like, high frequency and the low frequency. We can deconstruct an image endlessly. Here's the actual highlights, the mask of the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. All of this has come together in about 25 layers to recreate the image from the original. Why is this? What's the point of this? To show what's possible, to show that you can extract, like a surgeon, anything you need to modify an image. That's why we're in Photoshop, to modify images. It's not just the nerdy side. We have to be artistic. What is our vision? But when you understand that this is all data and you can manipulate it with tools, I don't mean you don't need to be a coder at all. You can be really, really powerful. And that's why I've created this demo for my students to look at it. And there's a lot to it, and it's a huge action. But it's just an example of a visualization of what we can do with retouching beyond, well, how do I make skin pretty, right? That kind of thing.
One of the things, like when you were showing like a mask for the highlights, one of the jobs I just had to do, like this was a JPEG they sent me. We didn't have the raw file to work on. Like, oh, the highlights are just too bright. Everything else is great, but we need to just attack the highlights. You need to bring them down in tone, add a little color into them, and a way to separate those out where you're not affecting everything else, and you don't have to get in and carefully hand paint and be really careful around the edges or whatever. So things like that are really essential. And when you're working for clients, you can't predict what kind of a request they're going to have. I was working on something. It was a shot of a bourbon bottle. And at first it was like, clean up the background and smooth these things out or whatever like that. And then I was like, oh, the embossed glass on the top where it said California across, like, we really need to make that pop. How are you going to do that? Well,
should I share that image? I think you have that image up. Should I?
I have some different images up for that same photographer. I didn't have that one, but I can.
Yeah, let me know when you're ready, and I'll share your screen when you do.
Let me see.
Oh my God! Sorry, my phone keeps buzzing. It was quiet all morning, and then now.
And it's a big file, so it's taking a little time to load.
Sure.
Is it a PSB?
Interestingly enough, once I show you this, yeah, I work on big files with movie poster stuff. I work on 20, 30 gigabyte files are pretty common these days. I think my record was a 60 gigabyte file a while ago.
I sacrifice layers.
It's kind of funny because as the computers get fast,
we lost them.
Oh, and his file sizes, everything. It's taking away your bandwidth,
Yeah, it's clearly messing with his computer. You're all breaking up, Dennis. We can barely hear you.
It's 60 gigabyte files.
Like I said, I will sacrifice layers before I save a PSB. I'm like, how bad do I want those layers? How bad do I want those channels? Probably not.
Right. I know a lot of people that work they will have different
editable
iterations of it.
Yeah.
So they might have some files where some of the layers are kind of merged down, and then other ones you have all of the layers. Yeah.
Hey Dennis, I don't know if you can hear us, but you're completely breaking up. We hear about 10% of what you're saying.
Or 5% even.
Yeah, if that. Opening that file was not good for that computer.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Is he gone?
Yeah.
We've lost him.
Well, you can show some more of your work that's open in Photoshop too.
Yeah, I've got a few different images open, and I know that. Well, I don't know, but if people were hoping to see today a full workflow, whatever. That's not practical, and that's not what we're here for. But I hope that I give the idea of what's possible. Simple things like I talked about at the beginning of this. Explore different radii in your frequency separation. Who knows what direction you can go as soon as you start understanding that. Change blend modes on different adjustment layers. I mean, those 2 tips alone, I don't think any of my students do, because it's not something people talk about. Or if they do, they mention it casually for one demo and they don't explain why. I see that on videos a lot. A lot of, well, I put it on color mode because I like it better. No. Why? Why is that better? You don't see that in education. I'm not trying to just crap on a bunch of educators. Everybody means well, mostly. But the why is very, very important. And I think that's what I try to push in my curriculum, certainly what Dennis pushes, because we want to create powerful creatives out there. And there's some that are just dying for it. I don't know how many people I have started that are experienced retouchers that I begin my curriculum with them over a few private sessions where I'm just fixing and cleaning up their misinformed education that they got from somewhere.
Sure.
And it's not that people mean well, it's not mean unwell. It's not malice. It's just they're like, oh, well, I didn't realize it was that. Exactly. We're trying to.
I was say I remember when I worked for advertising, and I'd show up as a freelancer, and I was given the previous layered file by someone, and then the first day, it almost seemed like I'd have to clean up all the, terrible organization and redundancy of layers and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then kind of get into the groove.
Yeah, I think my computer just isn't going to want to share something today because before all I could share was a window, and now when I share a window, everything starts to go slow and stutter, and
it's all right.
But I completely agree with you about what you're saying about the layer structure and all that. When you're working as a commercial retoucher, one of the things that you have to recognize is that, especially if you're working with someone that's going to go through an ad agency, their production department is going to get your layered file, and they're going to need to be able to break that down. So you've got the product, the whiskey bottle against the background. They're going to need to be able to break that down and recrop it or do something else to it, or something like that. So your layer file has to be structured in a way that somebody else can take a look at this like, wow, this is well put together. I can figure out what I need to do. Every layer is named. Every layer group has a name for it. So it's not like
that's if you're considerate.
Yeah, but you're also not going to get asked back to work on files a lot if that's what your habit is. So like I'll get things from designers a lot of time like layer 147.
I know.
No clue. And you'll click on it like you try to load a selection, you try to figure out what's in there, like, oh, layer 147 is an empty layer. There's nothing in it. So I spent 10 minutes trying to figure out what it does.
Yeah, on a production team like that, I used to be a graphic designer before I got into photography in earnest. I always dabbled, but I used to be a graphic designer and a web designer. And, you have to submit a UI or modify a UI that the coders have made function. And then you send it off to whoever needs to do that part of it. And they don't understand your graphics, or they don't understand your rollover states, or nothing is labeled. That doesn't help anything. So working in a production team, that organization is obviously crucial. However, working even individually by yourself, when you start getting more advanced and understanding how to control things, organization is crucial, at least a methodology, because if not, you're going to work against yourself as you're working, especially if you need to make a set match. Like if I had 12 of these shots of Shelby in this little, broken down factory, well, they need to match. And I bet you some of those layers I'm going to need again, things like that. You got to keep yourself organized.
Yeah. One of the things that, even if you're just working on the shot of the lady against the table that you showed earlier, for that, if suppose you did all your work and you merged it into a smart object because you're going to liquefy, you're going to change something, whatever, and you did a little liquefying, and then you realize like, oh, I need a little more canvas size on the right. I need to add a little bit. So you add the canvas size. Well, now your liquefy is out of register. So you have to turn the smart object you liquefied into a smart object itself, because you have to know that the liquefy uses the canvas size for the mesh. It's not the object for the mesh. And I've run into that before with things like, we had fixed the seat of this chair the guy's sitting under is showing the weight of it. That disappeared. What happened? Like, oh, we changed canvas size. Now it's, it's warping somewhere else. So
Yeah,
it's all these things you have to understand about commercial retouching versus just for yourself.
Yeah, I for my work, I only use Smart Object for liquify for personal reasons. Like, I know this model and she may or may not like what I've decided. So I'm going to keep myself some flexibility on liquify. But since I don't work with a production team, I commit to liquify. I just flatten and go. But yeah, exactly. That kind of workflow, that kind of non-destructive workflow, once it becomes second nature, I mean, at first it's tedious for people just starting out. But once that non-destructive workflow becomes second nature, like I said, it just makes you more powerful. You can change things and keep the creativity flowing instead of just fighting with yourself. So this is why I encourage it. I'm like, look, there's a lot of technical. You don't have to get blinded by it. Absorb it, make it part of what you do, and your creativity will benefit. I promise. You just got to learn it and you got to practice it.
Right.
Yep. Totally agree.
And so let me remind people about signing up, and then I'll share your links as well. But yeah, so you can sign up for the Art and Business of Commercial Retouching workshop in Los Angeles for October 5th. You can use the code DREWKAV, and the link will be added to the event page and in the description on my YouTube of the YouTube recording. And
yeah, the website for our event is retouching-secrets.com.
Right. Well, I have a link that I'm going to be sharing.
Yeah, but anybody who doesn't want to look.
Yeah. So yeah, so it'll be, Art and Business Commercial Retouching. I'll have the link for you. And so you can find Nino online at ninobatista.com. Right, Nino?
Yes, sir. That's right.
And Dennis at dunbardigital.com. And do consider subscribing for more Photoshop and Lightroom, as well as AI art, digital art focused live streams and tutorials on my YouTube, youtube.com at DREWKAV. That's youtube.com at DREWKAV. And if you didn't get that, that's DREWKAV on YouTube.
I also put a link in the chat here for my Substack page. I try to write articles about Photoshop tips and things like that pretty regularly. I do like one a month, whatever. So look for me on Substack.
Yeah, let me drag that up. So right here. Okay, so yeah, so that's substack.com/@Dennis Dunbar. And then if you haven't already, I will ask you to join the new Photoshop and Lightroom group. Facebook gave the old group, some members, some strange violations for so-called copyright or intellectual property violations, which they never show you what they are, but said we could lose the group. So we ended up archiving that group, moving it over. So same name, Photoshop and Lightroom group, new URL, Photoshop and Lightroom group on Facebook. And if you're a fan of digital art, come join the AI Art and Digital Art group, facebook.com/groups, AI Art Digital Art. But yeah, Facebook is quite active. I do also have the same groups, Photoshop and Lightroom and the AI Art Digital Art group on LinkedIn. But it's strange. People just keep joining as members, but no one really posts. So very different reality.
I remember when LinkedIn groups were pretty active discussion groups.
Yeah.
And then at some point they just kind of seemed to like really fade away.
Yeah, it's strange. I even took over a big group that I think it was a Lightroom group, and then I made it Photoshop and Lightroom, and I thought it was going to be pretty active. But yeah, just people keep joining as members and not posting, so
Interesting.
Voyeurs and
interesting enough, though, when it comes to networking to get jobs and make connections with people at ad agencies or whatever, LinkedIn is a valuable tool, very valuable tool.
Yeah, it's still good to. I've seen a lot of really good article sharing, news sharing. So there's a very good kind of conversations about some new event or news or event that's happening. So that's good.
Like one of the things I use it for regularly is like in the entertainment world, in entertainment advertising world, people like the clients, the creative directors I work with, or the production managers who hire me, they move from place to place. Well, I can follow them, and they're like, who else is at that shop I should know? I can find that information out on LinkedIn.
All right. Good point. Very good point. So yes, so do keep your eye on the top of the Facebook and LinkedIn groups for a link to the recording, which will have a link to this event, and the event page on Facebook. I'll also post a direct post about this event with the link. So thanks everyone for attending. Thank you so much, Dennis and Nino. And
Hopefully next time my screen sharing will work.
Yeah,
All good.
we'll have you again and have you present your Photoshop wonderfulness. So thanks everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. Keep your eyes at the top of the group. Also in general, keep your eyes at the top of the group for not only say a link to this recording, but any news, contests, etc. Always keep your eye at the top of the top pin post. Thanks everybody. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Andrew.